After more than a month of negotiation, talks on forming a coalition government in Germany have collapsed, leaving Angela Merkel facing her biggest challenge in 12 years as chancellor. Some parties have said there is no mutual trust among them on issues such as tax, environmental protection, and especially refugees and immigrants from the Middle East. How is the political scene changing in Germany? What solutions will resolve the current political setback? And how will the resulting German government shape the European Union as a whole? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Anna Tangen, author and columnist, and Dr. Jin Ling from the China Institute of International Studies. And we shall also talk via satellite to Natalie Carney, CGTN correspondent in Munich, Germany, and Fraser Cameron, director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Let me go to Natalie first. Can you brief me on the following issue? Is this a serious political crisis for Angela Merkel herself? And do you think this is something big for the European Union?
IFB is dropped.
Natalie, can you hear me? Obviously, she's not prepared. She's not ready yet. So, Dr. Jinling, what do you think of the current political crisis for the Chancellor?
Yeah, it has been the second blow to Chancellor. The first one is during the election. It has been said that the Chancellor has won the election but lost the support of the voters. So this time, the Chancellor herself has put high ambition on the coalition formation, but now the coalition negotiation collapsed. So that's a second blow to the Chancellor, because Chancellor Merkel has been in power for 12 years, has been considered as a symbol of stability for German politics. Now,
and for German economy, or even the economy of the European Union.
You are totally right. So now, the collapse of the talks have brought the uncertainties and instability for the German politics. So it has been the crisis for her.
So this is a devastating crisis for Angela Merkel herself. What do you think of the future?
Well, I think really the future is not as dire as my colleague has pointed out, because Germany is a very practical place. It's about business. They know, they're completely dependent on exports. They need to get their machine going. Uncertainty is not only the hobgoblin of diplomacy, but also business. So on two fronts, both with the EU, where Germany has traditionally been the strongest leader, or by default in many senses, and in the business community, they're going to want something to come together. And I think a lot will depend on this next snap election, how this is handled, who gets more or less votes. Obviously, the more business-centered party is looking to gain and perhaps be the upper-ended partner of this. But if you look at the situation, the business side can't really get together with anybody. No one's going to support them, the Greens and the Liberals. So it's one of those things where it's going to have to be a coalition between these two. The question is, which one will be the senior partner?
Having been in power in 12 years, as you said earlier, Dr. Jinling, isn't it so embarrassing, if not a humiliation, for Angela Merkel to have a minority government? It means none of the serious legislative pieces will be easily adopted by members of the parliament. What do you think of the challenges ahead?
Yeah, now the Chancellor herself has openly rejected the scenario of the minority government, because
Then what would be the alternative if she has rejected the idea of a minority government?
She has said she herself will not reject another election.
Another election?
And that is her open position. And also now another option or possible scenario is the changing position of the Social Democratic Party. During the election, the party has won more than 20% support. That means to back to the pattern of the grand coalition between the SPD and the union parties. But the problem here is the leader, the Schulz of the SPD has said, no, that's option. So it's really a kind of...
this is indeed a dilemma, a catch-22 situation. A second election, that's way impossible, a mission impossible for the Social Democratic Party. What do you think of the remote possibility, Anna?
Well, as I said, they're going to have a snap election. The question is, which of the these grand coalition partners is going to come out a little bit ahead? If they're equal, then there might be some more jockeying going along. But right now, there is no governable coalition other than these two parts, and that's the reality. So everybody in Europe, Macron, everybody has to do the political calculation how this is going. Ultimately, it's down to the German people and how sensible they want to be about having a governing party that can get things done.
What are the key issues that led to the walkout of the SPD from the coalition?
Actually, when you look at the different parties within the political spectrum, you could find the Green Party and the FDP are almost on the different end of the spectrum. So they hold almost totally different views.
That's why the head of the FDP said there's no basis for trust.
Yeah, the FDP has said no basis of trust. So the issues, for example, the tax cut policy, especially the refugee policies, and also environmental protection policies. For example, the Greens has asked the end or the so-called coexit policy of energy. So that is unacceptable to FDP. And also the quotas of refugee quotas the FDP advocated is also unacceptable to the Greens. So at the very beginning, the coalition talks are very difficult.
Well, thank you so much. Let me go back to Natalie Carney, our colleague, CGTN correspondent, who's standing by in Munich. Hello, Natalie. I'm so glad that you are ready. So the issue is, what do you think of the serious issues that led to the division between CDU and its old partner, the SPD, which walked out of the negotiation? What do you think of those issues? Climate change, environmental protection, tax, refugee? Which is the most important and suicidal one for Angela Merkel?
Well, here in Bavaria, I'd probably have to say the refugee issue. The SDU, the CDU runs alongside with the CSU, which is sort of their sister party here in Bavaria, and has a lot of influence as to what the CDU has to say. So they're almost like sister parties. So when we speak of a coalition, we really need to talk about four parties involved: the CDU, the CSU, as well as the FPD and the Greens. And here in Bavaria, the CSU has had an incredible problem with Angela Merkel's refugee policy. So that, I would say, is definitely the issue that most voters sort of took with them when they went to cast their ballots. And thereby we did see actually a lot of division between the CDU and the CSU, who are traditionally quite a bit more conservative. Those two parties butted heads on Angela Merkel's refugees party, and we saw that reflected as well in the polls here. The CSU did lose, quite frankly, a very large proportionate number of seats than they have in the past, and a lot of those, it must be said, went to the AfD, which of course is the Alternative for Deutschland, that have been campaigning on an anti-Euro and anti-immigration platform. They have found a lot of favor with traditionally CDU and CSU voters who see these two parties as leaning too far left, away from their sort of center-right traditional platform. So that here in Bavaria is certainly a state who really saw themselves at the forefront, the front line of the refugee crisis, when more than 1.6 million refugees streamed into Germany, 1.6 being the number from the Statistics Bureau here in the country. Most of them did stream through Bavaria. So it's a very, very hotly contested issue here, and I'd have to say that's probably what's most on the voters' mind at this time.
Natalie, what was the immediate response from Brussels, I mean the European Union, towards this collapse of the negotiation?
Well, I think all European countries have come out basically saying this is not good. The Stalin coalition talks here in Germany is something that everybody's had their eye on, not just the German people. Of course, Germany places very high amongst the political ladder as far as the European Union is concerned, and as far as its policies are concerned. It is a big reason because, again, of this refugee situation that we've been seeing this rise of nationalism and right-wing sentiment in other EU nations, most recently in Austria, the sister or the neighboring country to Bavaria. So I think all prime ministers and presidents have come out, including Macron in France, right away saying this is not a good situation, and they all want to see some sort of solution come out of it. And of course, the president of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, said that solution is going to come from negotiation talks. It's way too early at the moment to say that we're going to have a snap election here. Of course, the country is very constitutionally bound and restricted to just hold snap elections. So there's going to be a lot of discussions to be had, a lot that are going to be headed by the president himself, who's going to meet with each individual party over the next few days to try to push together some semblance of negotiation talks that the parties can sit down and actually look at. So at this point, it's really hard to envision what's going to come out of all of this. The SPD, the SDP, while they've said they will not go into negotiation talks with the CDU again, the leader of that party, Martin Schulz, also said that, well, if the president asks me to sit down for negotiation talks with the CDU, I'll respect the president's wishes. So again, there could be, that presents a realm of another possible grand coalition. It's just too early to see what's going to come of it, but Merkel is finding herself very much between a rock and a hard place right now.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels. Hi, Fraser. Given the gridlock at the moment, what do you think of the possibility of having a snap election for Angela Merkel? What do you think of the opposition that she's going to have from other parties or coalition partners, if any?
Well, nobody wants an early election, and it's quite difficult, as Natalie pointed out. So I think there will be a protracted round of further talks involving the president, perhaps seeing if they can get this Jamaica coalition back together, or if not, a coalition with the SPD. But if there are elections, it won't be till next spring, which means that Germany effectively has been about 6 months without being able to take any big decisions, and that's a problem not only for Germany, but for Europe and the wider world as well.
The issue is whether a weak CDU, which used to be the largest political force in Germany, will lead to further erosion of the European cohesiveness, given the Brexit, Catalonia, and other elements of the chaos that characterize the political process of European integration. What do you think of the weakened leadership of Germany for the European Union?
Well, Germany has always been the most important member, and it's important to recall that the AfD, which ran essentially on an anti-EU platform, only got 12.7%. So the vast majority of votes went to pro-EU parties. Now, evidently, it's going to take some time, but there's not going to be a fundamental change in Germany's approach towards the EU, because Germany's national interest is fundamentally bound up with a successful European Union. So I don't expect there will be any changes. It's simply going to take longer now to actually get a government in situ.
What do you think of the future of Angela Merkel herself? Fraser?
She says she wants to stay on. I think inevitably her position is weakened now. There's already talking about potential successors, but nobody is ready to plunge the dagger into the back just now. So I think she will still be the favorite to lead this CDU if there are snap elections.
Will she be a lame duck without being able to form a majority in the parliament? Without such a majority, it is virtually impossible to seriously adopt any piece of legislation. Fraser?
You can work successfully. Many other governments around Europe have shown you can work with a minority government. The Germans have never tried it before. This is unknown territory, but Merkel could actually build a coalition on different issues within Parliament, sometimes relying on the SPD, sometimes on the Greens, sometimes on the FDP, depending on the issue. So I don't think that necessarily a minority government would fail or lead to weak government. But you're right. I mean, Merkel is now rather a lame duck, but still quite a strong lame duck.
Thank you so much. That's Fraser Cameron from Brussels. Do you agree that Angela Merkel will be a strong lame duck? And what does that mean? A lame duck is a lame duck.
About
yeah,
that
lame duck is lame duck, a strong lame duck. But I agree with some of his points that the current, the dilemma Merkel faces will not from long term to change its position in European Union. And also, I couldn't agree with his point is that the minority government doesn't necessarily mean unstable or inefficiency. To me, that definitely means it will, in Germany's political history after the Second World War, there have never been such a situation. And, it's from Merkel herself, it's also couldn't tolerate that the so-called case-by-case decision-making process, as Cameron has said, to depend on different parties on different issues. So that is why she says she would like to have another snap election.
I'm going to agree.
Anna, do you think she is a lame duck or a rose duck?
I think neither. Actually, time will tell. I do think contrary to everyone else, that there will be a snap election. There's really no other alternative. They're too far away on the main issues. I agree with you on the minority thing. Minority government being a non-starter. There's no way she can do this because those parties would risk fury from their constituents when there is another vote saying you did not get what we wanted. You allowed yourselves to be manipulated, so we got neither. So why should we vote for you? So at this point, she really has very little options. If there is some way of reforming the Grand Coalition, that would be one thing, but she'd have to give up a tremendous amount of power. Literally, probably almost half of her cabinet would have to go to them.
Let me go back to the issue that led to much of the internal bleeding within the old coalition government and the current crisis in Germany, the issue of refugees. What's going to happen to the family members who have been left behind in Syria or other parts of the Middle East that are beset by violence, sectarian violence, civil strife, so on and so forth? Do you think these family members will likely be brought to Germany to have the family reunion of those who immigrated here?
Actually, that's a very sensitive issue during the talks. That's also the major differences between the Greens and the FDP. The Greens advocate for the reunion of the family members, but it has been strongly opposed by FDP. And also, during very intense negotiations between the CSU and the CDU, the Union Party has agreed on the point to have quotas for the refugees. So if you look at the development of refugee policy in German politics, you could see a kind of a hard, toughened policy. The policy will become tough and tough for the refugees. So in the future, the maneuver place for the political parties to, especially the position for Green parties, the spaces will be very limited.
I don't think she has much. She changed her position on refugees from early on saying let us open the doors to taking more pragmatic approach.
I'm afraid your choice of the word change is a little bit too strong. Maybe she has
adjusted
and
he
altered
says
her old policy.
Strong lame duck. I say change. From that perspective, no. I mean, she only has so much room to maneuver at this point. There's no one waiting in the wings. She has this perception and the reality that crime has increased. Now, it's not clear exactly who's doing this, except from the German popular opinion, they believe it's foreigners, whether they're from people outside the EU or from people within the EU who are creating these crimes. So it's a very, very dangerous situation for her. But I do think she can emerge in the end because she's no one else.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Anna Tangen, Dr. Jinling, Natalie Carney, and Fraser Cameron. We're discussing the latest political crisis following the election in September in Germany, will it be the end game for the CDU, and Angela Merkel, the chancellor herself, will be back and clarify the messy situation there in the heartland of European politics? So stay with us, please. Welcome back. Let me go back to Fraser Cameron. Hello, Fraser. Do you think the weakened leadership of Germany, the weakened leadership of Angela Merkel, will further erode the fragile unity, if any, of the European Union? Some of the observers who follow the process in Germany would be cautiously pessimistic. I would not say cautiously optimistic about the future of the European Union, because there have been so many challenges and multiple challenges arising from this continent following Brexit itself.
Well, as I said before, the future prosperity and cohesion of the European Union is a vital German national interest, regardless essentially of who forms the government. Certainly Merkel may be slightly weakened, but I think she still wants to press ahead with Macron in France to produce some genuine reforms and bring forward further integration in the banking sector and defense and so on. This may take longer now. It's not going to happen in the spring of 2018. It may be, towards the summer or the autumn. But I think she's not going to change her position on Europe, and I think Europe was not a divisive issue in terms of the election either. All the parties, SPD, Greens, CSU, are basically pro-European parties.
Prime Minister May, who herself faces the imminent danger of being fired by her own party, do you think she's going to take advantage of the weakened leadership of Angela Merkel in the process of negotiations concerning Brexit, of course?
Some Brexiteers in the party have called her to do that, but it would be very dangerous. This is not an inner-party issue in Germany. Germany's taken a pretty tough line on the negotiations, along with France, saying that Britain has to recognize that leaving the club means there's a price to pay. And unless Britain actually comes up with the money that is due in terms of its contractual commitments, it will be very difficult to move on to the next stage. So I don't see any weakening of the German position on this. It's a question of the Brits who are starting to move slowly. Almost every week now they're moving more and more towards the EU position, to understand that the EU is taking a very united stand on the question of money and the questions of citizens' rights, and a very difficult situation pushed now by the Irish government concerns the border. That's going to be a really problematic issue to resolve.
What do you think of the German economy?
The German economy is still the strongest, biggest in Europe. Whether you have coalition government that's going to take longer to form, it's not really going to affect the economy. The euro dipped about 0.5% yesterday, but stabilized again. So the fundamentals are really very good. I mean, unemployment's almost zero in Germany. They have a fantastic export surplus. The model works for Germany, and that's not going to change. So I don't have any worries on the economic front.
Thank you so much, Fraser, for being with us and your insightful analysis about the dynamics and vulnerability in European politics. Welcome back. Anna, do you think what President Trump has done about the European integration and leadership of Germany has paid off somehow? Because, a decimated German leadership will mean more opportunities for putting America first.
Well, I think if he tries to push that point, he'll actually help Merkel, because any kind of attack right now from Donald Trump, who is massively unpopular in Germany, would literally propel her to a few more percentage points to where she wants to be. I think Trump has actually been the main reason why the EU has pulled together over the last year. His consistent attacks, the uncertainty, everything that he's doing, saying he doesn't believe in his bilateralisms, attacks on NATO, the United Nations, climate change, all of these things, these are not questions in Germany. from their perspective, he's just unbelievable. So any attack by him or any attempt to do that, and this is the same true with May. If May thinks that she can pull one over, a fast one, and put a lot of pressure, she's absolutely wrong. The country there is very much united, except for a very small minority.
Dr. Jinling, you look at the list of questions on the agenda of the campaign. You don't have any foreign policy issues, either about the transatlantic relationship, TTIP, or with China, a rising economy in the Asia-Pacific region. Does it mean the Germans have no interest whatsoever in foreign policy issues? Refugee might bear some relevance, but whatever your articulation about the foreign policy issues, so let us know why Germans always prioritize the domestic issues.
Actually, this time during the election, foreign policy, as you have said, hasn't been high on the agenda. On one side is because that most of the parties have similar positions as on the foreign policy issues, especially as we have talked about their position toward Trump. And also, you know, that is not the major disagreements among the parties. I think that is the major reasons.
We don't foresee any major black swan towards the end of 2017. However, what do you think of the impact of populism on German politics this time around?
You catch the very key point in German politics. This time, it has been described as a turning point of German politics. It's because of far right.
Are you suggesting this is indeed a black swan?
To some extent, it's not the black as a Brexit and as a Trump election in U.S., but it's also to some extent unexpected, you know, especially for German politics. The far right party, AfD, the first time entered the parliament. Today, you could see the result, the impact of that kind of populism, because, you know, when we thought back, the SPD rejected the Grand Coalition. There is a kind of saying that because they just try to avoid a kind of situation that the AfD became the biggest opposition party in parliament. Because according to the constitution, if AfD has been the biggest opposition party, it could have a much bigger role in the policy-making process. So from this point of view, the AfD has crossed the benchmark and entered the parliament is a turning point of German politics, especially when you consider in the history how the far-right ideology has been rejected by the voters. But this time, because of the refugee crisis, the rising populism, you know, in almost all European countries, that has led the German haven't the exception, been the exception.
Well, next year we'll witness the 200th anniversary of the birth of Karl Marx, who said at the beginning of a Communist Manifesto, there's a haunting specter above the continental Europe. This haunting specter, ironically, in the 21st century, I'm afraid, is a populism. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.